much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Nicolas. So Nicolas, feel free to share your screen and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Can you see?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, but it's not full screen yet. Oh, there it goes. Perfect.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today and be able to present my research. So just before getting into the presentation, for the past 2 years, I've been studying agroecology, focusing on biocultural diversity and traditional foodways. So I was lucky enough to integrate the Nordic People and Plants project. It's a joint project that is interdisciplinary and led by the Natural and Cultural History Museum of Oslo. So it's also a collaborative project. And at the beginning of my study, we discussed together with the Norwegian Association of Mycology and Foraging our respective needs and objectives, and they wanted to develop guidelines of sustainable foraging in this context of new Nordic food movements. So my mission was to explore to what extent the foraging of wild edible plants is a sustainable activity in Norway. So I had 3 main study objectives. The first one was to study and explore the socio-ecological context of the foraging activity in Norway. So I wanted to answer the research question of who forage and what is being foraged. The second objective was on the investigation of motivations, practices, and perceptions. And I specifically wanted to answer the research question, why people forage, how they do it, and how do they feel about it? What is the perceived impact they have on biodiversity? The third objective was on the exploration of interactions and influences, specifically looking at the market influence and how the new Nordic food movements promote the use of wild edible plants and the foraging activity. And the final objective was to assess the impact and to answer the main study problem. So to that end, I had 3 main hypotheses. The first one was on the foraging and plants relation, and I assumed that specific kind of foraging modes would affect the biodiversity. For example, plants from which the roots would be collected would be more vulnerable than others. The second hypothesis was on the relation between foraging and foragers, and I assumed that different socio-cultural constructs, for example, being a professional forager or a non-professional one, would have different foraging attitudes on the field. The third hypothesis was on the foraging and market interaction, and I specifically wanted to look at how the market influenced the foraging activity, and I assume that new Nordic cuisine promotes and affect the foraging activity in some way. So now, how did I do? I used a participatory framework and I went on the field doing some ethnography with professional foragers, and we delivered to a few restaurants, had the chance to talk to different chefs. I also submitted an online questionnaire and I got 219 responses. And I interviewed 19 key stakeholders from professional to non-professionals, also chefs and conservationists. So now, what about the main findings? Who forage? I found that overall, the Norwegian foraging activity is driven in Norway mainly by non-professional. So 95% of my online questionnaire respondents were non-professional foragers, and 60% of them were members of a foraging society. The remaining 5% were professionals, and all of them, almost all of them, were members of a foraging association. I then analyzed the knowledge of these people And I used the number of items or the number of plants they reported in the questionnaire as a proxy, as well as a self-assessment knowledge level that they had the chance to give in the questionnaire. So I found overall that the professionals were more knowledgeable than the amateur, and that the members were also more knowledgeable than the non-members. And then I tried to relate the learning ways, how people learn about foraging and wild edible plants. And I did not find any significant relationship between the different socio-cultural constructs. So most foragers in Norway, they learn from a personal practice and from family peers. So what is being foraged? I found 274 wild edible plants in Norway that belongs to 67 different botanical families. The most important collected plant parts are berries, leaves, and flowers. And I found a high number of reports for 23 wild edible plants. So I categorized them as the most important, or the cultural most important species in Norway. So while people forage, the first thing we saw and the first thing I could analyze that there has been a shift in the foraging motivations since the Green Revolution. So before it was a necessity, and this concept of mat is the food, auk is the increase, was related to a subsistence lifestyle and to other activities such as fishing, hunting. And now it's much more connected to this outdoor lifestyle, the Nordic outdoor lifestyle, connected to recreation. So it's the foraging activity is part of a lifestyle, and there is a strong goal to feel free and get a sense of freedom. And at the core of this freedom is knowledge, and there is a strong associated educational value to the foraging activity. So most of the respondents, they like to learn and they like to teach about foraging to others, and they like to share. How people forage. So remember, I reported 23 most important species. And from these 23 most reported species, the collected plant parts are berries, leaves, and flowers. And in terms of volumes, I did not have any consistent data. So it's very difficult for the foragers to recall volumes, and only 20% of them could give somehow a range of quantity they forage. However, this was unspecific to any plants. So they consider more the sustainability of the practice.
Hello.
When they, so sorry, I got confused. So yeah, they consider more the sustainability of the practice, about being aware of the surroundings, and about not about focusing more on the plant community rather than the plant individuals, and on the plant ecology. So how the plant reproduces, how it develops. So the perceived impact of foraging on plants in Norway is that foragers believe it's a part of a sustainable lifestyle. However, there are unsustainable practices such as overharvesting and the spread of invasives, edible invasives. And these are localized pressures. So for example, mainly around densely populated areas in the big cities, fashionable plant resources are under pressure. 50% of the foragers knew about regulations. As an example, not being allowed to collect red listed species. And they most reported that they were guided by their common sense as a way to forage in a sustainable way. So it clearly shows that there is a lack of information on how to forage in a sustainable way. So I then conducted an impact assessment, and we categorized the species we found based on the different different information. So if there are natives, aliens, if they IUCN classification in the Norwegian Red List, but also the number of reports, the collected plant parts in the foraging process, and also the reproductive strategy. So we affected different letters from green to red. And whenever there is a star, it means that there is an exception to the category. And then we prioritized the species, and we found 20 species of concern. So the 20 species of concern, there are 4 alien species, 7 species vulnerable in the Norwegian Red List. And from the 50 G starred category, 9 are least concerned, but highly salient and quite fashionable. As an example, Cicelrot, which is Polypodium vulgare, it's very nice licorice taste. It's a native species. It is least concern. It has not a high number of reports, but the roots are being collected, and it could be it's not very abundant in the local areas. So we scored it orange. In conclusion, foraging is perceived as a sustainable activity as part of a sustainable lifestyle. There are unsustainable practices in local places, and the foraging community has this desire to shift from common sense to common science, and they are calling for more efforts and get more knowledge. And even though the professional activities remains quite niche and informal, it's trendy and powerful in the promotion of sustainable foraging and in the promotion of using wild edible plants. So for perspective, we're gonna organize a workshop, participatory workshop, to design these guidelines together with the local key experts we identified during the study. So I'd like to thank you very much, and I'm happy to hear about the questions and feedback.
Great, thank you so much, Nicolas. That was quite a comprehensive and interesting perspective on what ethnobotany can be for the world, and I hope that we might have some questions here. So if anyone has any questions, I see one already. So we'll probably only have time for 1 or maybe 2 questions, and so please try to keep it brief. Yeah. So this is Morgan Rule.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks for a great presentation, Nicolas. I had a question about whether, you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but did you include any questions in the online survey about stewardship practices that any of the foragers use as they spend time with these plants?
Yeah. So I had not the time to share it in the presentation, but indeed, some people they promote and they tend some plants. Specifically, there is one example on the shore, Crambe maritima, it's the sea kale, and people tend to promote it and manage it by weeding. And yeah, so there was a question about it in the questionnaire.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Nicolas? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Nicolas, so much.
Thank you.
Okay, very good.